Ultimatum by Julia Quay from the United States of America. I knocked on Lewis's dressing room door, my eyes scanning back down the carpeted hallway. No sign of Adrian peeking around a corner, thank the stars. That little shit had eavesdropped on me for the last time.
"Who is it?"
Lewis called from inside his posh suite. I stage-whispered my name, in case Adrian lurked out of sight. "You decent old man? I need to talk to you."
"Snowman, get in here," he answered. "Why all the whispering?"
His usual pre-show impatience permeated his heavy door. I drew in a deep breath and went inside. He sat on a wheeled stool facing away from the vanity mirror, his frilly tuxedo shirt untucking from his satiny pants as he struggled to pull on those thigh-high black patent leather boots he wore every show. I wanted to tease him about that gut he'd grown since we acquired Tamblyn, the new cook, but I figured it would be kinder and easier to skip the banter. Let the trapeze fly. He tossed me one unruly boot, his face still flushed from too much bending over.
"Help me with these," he insisted. "And with 15 minutes to opening curtain? What are you doing down here?"
I might have asked him the same question. But in 20-plus years of traveling with the Louis Bordeaux Intergalactic Menagerie and Flying Circus, I'd yet to see Louis, the founder, owner, ringleader, star, and stout heart of our show, exude anything but nervous irritation and fiddle farting in the final few minutes before showtime. Even wizards get pre-performance jitters. The perfect time to land my bombshell on him. I pulled the old shoe-fitting stool out from against the wall. Lewis's beloved mackerel Tabby, who had long used it as a shelter over her cushy bed, gave me a dirty look and went back to her catnap. I positioned the stool's ramp toward Lewis and straddled its low seat. With both my hands holding the boot open, his right foot glided easily down its long neck and fit snugly into the shoe. My hands stayed gripped on Lewis's thick calf. His puzzled eyes jerked up to meet mine. "It's come to this," I said, finding the grit to say what I'd rehearsed to my vanity mirror a gazillion times. "That boy is trouble, and you know it." Lewis's eyes narrowed, but I kept on before I lost my nerve. "I refuse to watch him tear apart what we've worked so hard to build. So either he goes—" I picked up the second boot, unfurling it with a satisfying snap. "Or I go." There. I'd said it. Score one for the Snowman. Not as if Lewis and I hadn't argued about almost everything in 47 years of friendship, with 23 years of that as business partners. But on this subject, Lewis had the blackest of blind spots. He crossed his arms over his big chest.
"My nephew has a name, you know."
"You're right, Lewis. Adrian has made quite a name for himself in his year working with us." I dropped his second boot and counted off offenses on my long, bony fingers. "Money missing whenever he mans the ticket sales booth." Lewis rolled his eyes in dismissal. I continued. "Complaints about his inappropriate advances from every female performer on our staff." Lewis's lips puckered, but he gave no hint of concession. Still I continued. "Animals gone missing. 3 rats and a rabbit in the last month. Always when Adrian's on the feeding rounds. Explain that to the animal board, Lewis." I felt my face redden with rage, my white hair brightening a few shades with the increased blood flow to my head. Lewis turned his gaze to the ceiling as he spoke.
"And how many times have we encountered Galactico out here,
Few horses had ever been beaten deader than this one, but still, the mention of the intergalactic police could chill me faster than the cold void of space through which we traveled. Lewis brought angry eyes back to mine.
"Not once," he shouted. "Not once in 23 years. But we pay their fees, follow their rules, account for all our animal births and deaths and illnesses. We take an inventory and report it every day at the right time, or face more fines and fees."
He closed his eyes and took a long, noisy breath.
"They don't patrol. They exist only to take our money. If Adrian wants to sell a few small animals on the side, I don't."
"He's trying to sneak magical animals on board," I interrupted him. Any of these should have been reason enough to turn Adrian into alligator food. This one, though, should have allowed us to first throw him into the deep fryer, then toss him to the alligators. I've heard him ask vendors on Fotis, on Trifig, on World 545 about what it would cost to buy eggs and larvae, embryos of magical creatures. My friend's eyes went half-mast with disgust, not for his nefarious nephew, but for me.
"He's still young, a little immature."
Lewis started on what had become his lead-in to the litany of excuses for Adrian's behavior.
"You know he'll eventually figure it out, as you did once upon a time."
Indeed, once upon a time, even a whiff of those memories would have caused me to back down. A New Orleans street hustle life until age 18, when I'd met Lewis. How he had gotten me my first real job at the rodeo he worked. How his friendship had given me something to believe in and become. But I wouldn't back down tonight. I stood up from the stool, towering over my friend. "Listen, Lewis. It's one thing to piss away the money, whether by carelessness or theft, or by Galactico's greedy hand. It's quite another to live out the rest of your days on some unpatrolled, unplotted penal planet in the Outer Rim. And that's what we'll get if they catch us selling our Earth animals." I paused to pick up his left boot again. "But magical animals?" I offered a hand to take his left foot, but Lewis kept it flat on the floor. "You are one powerful wizard, and your talents dazzle here on the show. But up against those creatures? How do you know some slimy little space slug won't contaminate the whole ship with some weird disease? Or eat all of our animals in one sitting?" Before I could take the what-ifs to an even scarier place, Lewis, his eyes closed, shook his head in refusal, and continued his litany of letting Adrian off the hook. I lowered my voice to a whisper and interrupted him again. "He knows about us, Lewis. The biggest gun I could pull on him. He knows we're shifters." A few seconds passed without either of us speaking. Lewis's face turned ashen. Over 2 galaxies, shapeshifters had been hunted, to almost extinction for all we knew. Certainly, we almost never spoke of it, let alone indulged in that powerful transition from man to beast. Long ago, in an abandoned rodeo stall, Lewis had recognized the latent power in me, coaxing me into unleashing the scaly, horned alligator I'd held within, while he muscled into a great Alaskan brown bear. The thought of anyone as young and immature as Adrian knowing such private, dangerous information about us brought fresh bile burning up my esophagus. I repeated what I'd come there to say. Either the kid goes, or I go. I tossed his remaining boot on the fitting stool, turned,
and walked out.
My legs shook a little as I walked down the carpeted hallway. So many things about Adrian I hadn't brought up. That smart-ass smirk. Those dead eyes, like snake eyes. Once blue, but now an eerie orange color since having them done back in Grahovith Canyon, the Marlburg system's most renowned haven for body alterations. I'd cornered Lewis about Adrian back then when that all went down, but never with an ultimatum looming behind it. I wondered if what I'd said would ruin his opening act tonight. Would he miss with that fireman's axe? Oh, who was I kidding? Lewis never missed. Any errors in his own strength or his visual acumen could always be corrected by his magical tweaking. That axe always found its target. Too bad Adrian couldn't be the target, I mused. Not for the first time. And what if Lewis didn't send Adrian packing to some other galactic port of call? Would I have the spine to keep my promise? I couldn't imagine life without the show. Our crew, always so loyal to both of us. The animals, whom I always felt more at home with than the staff. The traveling from planet to planet. So many fascinating worlds to wake up in. And Lewis, a fascinating world all of his own. I could barely remember a time without my friend. How could I ever exist without him? As I climbed the circular staircase to the left backstage area, the tension left me. The old familiar crackle of pre-show energy focused me, as it always did, on the 1,000 tiny details behind the scenes that I loved keeping in order. One walk through the prop room and I could identify any ball, scarf, hat, rubber chicken, or water pistol missing or out of order. One glance up at the spaghetti tangle of ropes, nets, and wires hanging overhead, and I knew which ones needed tightening, how many to replace while we traveled, and which flips and jumps our trapeze artists planned to perform without having to consult the night's trick list. As close to doing magic as I'd ever get. But I was no showman. Let Lewis and his colorfully costumed cast take the bows in front of the curtain. My black-clad backstage hands and I heard that same applause and knew, without us, there'd be no them. The opening music burst forth in a blare of trumpets and snare drum rolls. Lewis, who must have taken the staircase up to the right side of backstage, flounced out into the spotlight in his red sequined overcoat and ridiculous Victorian-era top hat. He'd managed to avoid me and arrive on stage with both boots on, I noticed. I couldn't help a wry smile. By the time he sailed through the introductory welcome and the first of many lame jokes, my consummate showman had already reeled that audience right in. At least my ultimatum hadn't thrown him off his timing. Right on cue, Xaviata, our top gymnast, flitted out next to him in a graceful whirl of mint green and gold. Perpendicular to the floor, a hoop, a lightweight 36-inch ring of sparkly polypropylene, floated around her as she spun and pirouetted across the stage. No magic, all achieved by Xaviata's incredible balance, lightning-fast touch, and years of practice with that hoop. Definitely magical in my book, and the eager audience agreed. She and Lewis had led with this opening act for a few seasons, and the simplicity of it always amazed me. No elephant march, no cast of thousands parading through the audience. Only the two of them. A delicate tease. Lewis trying to free the fairy princess from her hoop prison cell. The hoop deflecting every prop he tossed, turning it into something more dazzling. A plain tennis ball bounced off into a shower of confetti. A basketball changed into a bouquet of orange flowers. And you guessed it, Lewis's fireman axe, thrown the whole width of the stage, about to decapitate Xaviata, but knocked aside in the last micro instant by the downward trajectory of that hoop from overhead. Lewis's axe turned into a swan, taking graceful flight over the hooting swell of the adoring audience. That's when I spotted Adrian. He sat in the front row. I could barely make him out, with only the spotlight on for Lewis and Xaviata as they took deep bows of gratitude. But I recognized that dead-eyed stare. What was he doing in the audience? From under his feet, he pulled up something flat, holding it by a handle in his fist, clearly wanting me to see it. From my backstage vantage point, its sparkly finish caught the spotlight. It was Xaviata's storage case for her hoop. A flat suitcase, like a bygone artist's portfolio bag. No one was allowed to touch that case, except Xaviata, Lewis, and me. What was that little shit up to? The music picked up again. The lights blazed, and now the cast of thousands burst onto the scene. Lewis and Xaviata made an elegant spin back to the opposite side of backstage. Not before I caught both their eyes. They'd seen him too. Xaviata's green eyes smoldered with anger. Hardly her first run-in with Adrian's antics. Lewis actually looked a little shaken. He tugged at his white curls until they stood up like the sticky, sickly sweet tuft candy we sold on sticks out in the concession area. I dodged out of the way of Armigo's horse troop, losing sight of Adrian behind the dozen plumed and groomed beauties. Back in place, I looked out at the front row again. To my horror, his seat was empty. The case, gone. I panned the wide theater. No one in the aisles. No sparkly flash of the hoop case. The music built, and I realized too late that he had planned this perfectly. Right on cue, 6 overhead confetti cannons fired showers of wrapped chocolate and saltwater taffy candies out over the audience, all of it propelling gently down on our fine-paying customers. And faster than you could say Tootsie Roll, hundreds of people dove in and out of the aisles, shoveling up as much as they could hold. Adrian had an easy getaway. I turned and ran down the backstage stairs. I had no idea where he'd go, but clearly he wanted me to follow him. And oh, I would. Hell, if I found him, I would shift right in public for anyone to see. Turn that little shit into alligator food once and for all. I took the service elevator down to the East Animal Pens, the lowest point on our ship. It pained me to admit that Adrian, for all his breaking the most serious of animal rules, had an affinity for the creatures. Lewis usually threw that back in my face whenever I started piling on the reasons to hate Adrian. Today, all the animals in these cages along the walk were quiet, their usual behavior for this time of day. And the same went for the larger animal halls on the floors above. Adrian had not come down here. As much as I wanted to curl up around Crunchy, our longtime alligator in residence, I needed to find the little shit, confront him, and maybe even... I was getting ahead of myself. The elevator doors opened back onto the main floor, and Tamblin, in his spotless white chef jacket and with his glowing dark bald head, grabbed me by the sleeve. "Been looking everywhere for you, showman. Nobody knows where you went." "You seen Adrian?" I asked, ignoring his comment. "No, but you have to come now. I told you already this week. The big oven keeps coming on." Frustration mounted in my chest. Tamblyn might have increased staff morale tenfold with his great food, but his nitpicky insistence on my fixing his broken kitchen equipment before doing any other repairs around the ship had worn my patience threadbare. "Tamblyn," I said, emphasizing my every word, "I will look at it later. Right now, I need to find—" A rumbling noise came from the other side of the wall. We'd stopped, I realized, alongside the long outer wall of the big oven. Not since the days of pre-show dinner had we used the big oven. No one had been happier about painting over the "and dinner theater" portion of our name on the side of the spaceship. Feeding a full-time interplanetary circus staff and its animals is a big job. Feeding the whole audience before the show started bordered on insanity. Turning the big oven into a storage room had been one of my favorite days since joining the show. "But it's broken," I said. I closed my eyes and gave a heavy massage to the bridge of my nose. "It hasn't worked in years. It never worked right," I added, remembering that Tamblyn hadn't had the pleasure of filling the big oven with 1,000 portions of meat to cook, only to come back 15 minutes later and find the whole thing had turned off, or broken down, or had spewed water from its steam jets onto your as yet uncooked dinners that should be going onto plates in 10 minutes. Another rumble came from inside, as if whole shelves had fallen off its inside walls. Tamblyn was already hustling down the hall and around the corner to the big oven's door. I pictured Adrian hiding Saviata's hoop case in a compromising place, or filling it full of baby rabbits and setting it inside the land transport, bound for a meeting tomorrow with some seedy buyer. 5 minutes, I promised myself. A 5-minute surmise about what had made the flame come back on, and a quick assessment of how much we've lost to burned up inventory. Tamblyn stood ready to open the heavy door for me. The awful odor of burning oil and plastic already seeped out into the hall. My mind ran through what we kept in this big, out-of-the-way storage unit. Old equipment kept for parts, spare tools and plastic storage bins, rows and rows of metal baking racks, extra supplies of kitchen chemicals. If anything had caught fire, I could probably smother it by closing the door and making sure the flue was closed. I still kicked myself for spending any time on this. A small, containable kitchen fire. Find the nearest Class K extinguisher or call Lewis down to put it out. Tamblyn wrenched open the door. An oily blast of smoke belched out, burning my eyes immediately. But not before I saw what had set the fire. Not a faulty wire, not a weird chemical spill, and not an errant flame. In that big room, flying around on sooty wings, were 2 small dragons. A tiny part of me delighted to see this. Hadn't I just warned Lewis about this? Dragons secreted onto our ship. The little shit had done it. Carack! One of them screeched at me, throwing a long yellow flame from its wide throat. I spun around, slamming the door shut with my back, feeling the heat even through the thick insulated metal door. Tamblyn's eyes bulged like 2 marbles in his head. "What was that?" "Pets," I answered, summoning up my last ounce of snark for the day. "Look, don't open this, whatever you do." The poor man had already started to back away from the scene without my warning. "I'll get Lewis, and this'll all go away." I'm not sure I believed it myself, but I managed a brave face. I walked back toward the elevator and remembered one more important thing. "Timblin," I called from around the corner. "If you see Adrian, you call me right away." I got onto the elevator and headed back up to the theater. Lewis had also gone missing, according to everyone backstage. How many times had I encouraged him to use the headset to communicate while the performance went on? Too primitive, he'd insisted. I know at a glance what my people are thinking. Did he know right now that I was again thinking about tossing Adrian into Crunchy's feeding trough? I made my way into the props room. No Adrian, no surprise, and no Lewis. I could see where we were in the program, though, by which props were set out. Colorful ribbons for the aerial dance, a tiny clown bike, Lewis's fireman axe. Wherever he'd gone, he'd be back soon. Dimitri, our OCD safety director, had hung a new yellow fire hose alongside the extinguisher in this room. Without Lewis's help, I might need to play Dragon Slayer on my own, but I'd go adequately armed. I reached out to lift the extinguisher off the wall when, flash! A yellow knife stabbed my face. A heavy weight knocked my arms back down, and the new yellow fire hose threw itself off its hook, landing around my neck and chest like I was a child's ring toss peg. It was a snake, a massive pile of writhing, ringing muscle, squeezing, while its dead, orange eyes stayed locked on mine. I gasped a last breath and shape-shifted, but the snake was below the reach of my gnashing gator teeth and still crushing me around my chest. I thrashed. I shook. I knocked the prop table over with a loud crash. But no scaly armor, no horned claws of mine could get me even a single breath. I'm going to die, I thought, with a last struggle against my bonds. A few small black dots formed at the periphery of my vision, and I almost let go. Then the prop room door opened, and Lewis, still in his full ringleader costume, bounded inside. His transition to Alaskan brown bear was a blurred streak of red sequins and rippling brown fur as the great-muscled beast lunged across the room. Gleaming fangs and all four claws gouged the snake's tough flesh. Lewis's weight pulled us down into a wild knot of coiled sinew, writhing plates, and quivering muscle. My head banged hard against the floor, and I shifted back into a man. But the great snake was bleeding out under Lewis's mighty jaws. The squeezing stopped, and in a wink, Lewis was also a man again. He yanked those thick coils from around my neck and torso. Two brawny, sequined arms dragging that snake's heavy bulk to the opposite side of the room. The thing must have been 20 feet long and well over 75 lunar pounds. Lewis, breathing hard from his exertion, grabbed that snake's ugly yellow head and smashed it again into the concrete wall. I was still gasping for air. The damned thing must have partially crushed my windpipe. My head felt like someone had drilled a hole in it. I closed my eyes and focused on breathing, praying this was over. I opened them again, and there in the place of the yellow python was Adrian. Blood covered his face and half-crushed head. Lewis stood over him, panting hard. He pulled off his red overcoat and threw it onto the floor. Adrian's orange snake eyes had not turned all the way human yet. And over the jackhammering in my brain, I wondered if at last Lewis would take my side. My old friend turned away then, fumbling around on the table for his favorite prop. Even I couldn't help but get a little weepy for my friend's decision. He spun back around, the axe high over his shoulder. He has still never missed with that axe. If you enjoyed this short story, you may enjoy the other short stories in Space Wizards Volume 1. Scan the QR code on your screen to find out more. Thank you for listening.